Pete Maravich touched my heart ever since I was a kid. I never saw him play live, being a current 20-year-old born in 2004, but I fell in love with the movie, The Birth of the Pistol, constantly watching his highlights. I resonated so much with his upbringing because he always found a way to practice basketball, even without a hoop. What were he and his father all about? Basketball. Same with me and my dad. He would dribble on train tracks, dribble everywhere he went, walk around with the basketball. He did everything with the basketball. Get a feel for the leather when walking around with it, the seams of the ball, working on his hand-eye coordination with his dad, utilizing the most unique drills, dropping the ball behind his back, clapping, and catching it behind his back, all in one motion. Bouncing the ball as hard as possible between his legs with two hands and catching it behind his legs. I could picture it now, waking up in the morning around 8 a.m., feeling the crazy humidity of living in Sandy Springs, Georgia. My dad would be at work, and I would dribble in the apartment complex parking lot, pretending the painted lines of the parking spots were defenders, breaking the imaginary ankles of those lines, trying to dribble behind my back and between my legs, just like Pete Maravich. When I was 7, I started to feel like him, a delusional fan of basketball, thinking I would be an NBA player one day. I had the same floppy hair, skinny and spindly. I didn't look intimidating, but had a fierce mentality, married to the game of basketball, literally addicted. I remember feeling most like him in my crazy brain when I was in first grade and got to play with upper level kids in third grade with my brother. Maybe they just needed an extra kid. That was probably the reality. But I always told myself the coach saw me addicted to the game playing and I looked good. It makes a cooler story. I remember scoring my first ever organized basket, being so pumped, like John Starks pumping his fist in the 90s after making a big shot. The reason this connects to Pete is because he played varsity basketball in high school a year before he was even old enough to attend high school. So I manipulated my mind into thinking I'm a prodigy just like Pete Maravich. I may be biased, but if you simply don't respect Pete Maravich, you don't respect the game of basketball. All these fans saying players today would crush the players from earlier eras, yes, there's some logic to that. The league is as skilled as it's ever been. But why do we even have to compare? Why can't we just appreciate the beauty of the game? There's a common sense quote, things evolve over time, and so do we. Pistol Pete popularized the behind the back pass. It wasn't just functional, he brought flair to it, made the between the legs dribble smooth, the behind the back dribble, behind the head passes, no look passes, between the leg passes, double clutch shots, no look 3-pointers. He saw things no one else did. He was flat out special. He humiliated defenders. Imagine fundamentally playing the game and then this guy shows up his rookie year putting on a show like you were at a circus and absolutely cooks you. I know the defenders were pissed off and just wanted to clothesline him. P. Maravich's game was like a Van Gogh painting, dynamic, unpredictable, and full of swirling energy, where every dribble and pass was a brushstroke of creativity that left defenders in awe. He would pull up from deep in an era with no three-point line. Keep in mind, he averaged 44 points per game in college and 24 points per game in the pros for his career. In one season, he averaged 31 points per game. He even dropped 68 points on one of the greatest guard defenders of all time and one of the greatest guards in general, Walt Frazier from the New York Knicks, who's a two-time champion in 1970 and 1973. This was when he was a member of the Utah Jazz, Pete Maravich. He also added 11 assists. He would have had more points throughout his career, but he sadly suffered some lower body injuries. It has been reported that former LSU coach Dale Brown charted every shot Maravich scored, and he concluded that if his shots from three-point range had been counted as 3 points, Maravich's average would have totaled 57 points per game and 12 three-pointers per game. Of course, that isn't the whole truth, because obviously if there was a three-point line during that time, defenses would play him differently. But also there was no shot clock during that time, and there was no rushing offensive possessions due to there not being a shot clock. But no-look passes, the way he manipulated the ball, he was the first man to pull it from deep and turn around before the ball went in. He would handle the ball, let go of it for a split second, wave his hand like he was casting a spell from Harry Potter, having opponents second guess where he was going with the basketball and find an open teammate. He had defenders moving in slow motion like they just got frozen mid-play. Pete was literally poetry in motion. From his habit of shooting the ball from his side as if holding a revolver, some of the greatest NBA players of all time looked up to Pete. Larry Bird stated, Pete Maravich was a player ahead of his time. He could do things with the basketball that most of us could only dream about. Magic Johnson admired him. He was an artist. Watching him play was like watching a beautiful painting come to life. He made the impossible look easy. Pete Maravich was so special that before he was in the NBA, he was offered a chance to play for the Harlem Globetrotters. The legendary coach of the Globetrotters, Abe Saperstein, saw potential in Pete Maravich and offered him a spot on the team. However, Pete Maravich had aspirations of playing in the NBA, and he declined the offer to pursue a more traditional basketball career, ultimately being drafted third overall by the Atlanta Hawks in 1970. Maravich was often at odds with the coaching staff and management of the Atlanta Hawks despite putting up big-time numbers during his time there. While his individual brilliance was undeniable, his play style, flashy and often unpredictable play style, did not always mesh with the Hawks' team-oriented system. But also, besides Lou Hudson, he didn't really have a great supporting cast, which has been a theme throughout his career until he landed on the Celtics, and that's when he was banged up with injuries. The team of the Atlanta Hawks was struggling, and there were tensions over how Pete fit within the team structure. Despite his standout performances, the Hawks were unable to become serious championship contenders, which led to frustration among both Pete Maravich and the management. In 1974, after 4 seasons with Atlanta, the Hawks decided to trade Maravich, seeking to retool their roster and move in a different direction. The New Orleans Jazz, an expansion team hungry for a centerpiece of their franchise, acquired him. Having no established stars, he did make the playoffs with franchises, but struggled to make a big run due to not having a good, consistent supporting cast, if it's off the bench or even in the starting lineup. Then Maravich was plagued by knee injuries during his career, which started to take a toll on his athleticism as he got older. By the time he joined the Celtics, he was no longer the high-flying scoring machine he was in his younger years. His knee injuries severely limited his ability to contribute at the highest level, particularly in the postseason. Some also believe his flashy individual style of play, while incredibly entertaining, wasn't always the most conducive to winning championships. His game focused on scoring and creativity, which doesn't always mesh with the more traditional team-oriented systems that lead to championships. Maybe in the NBA today, he would fit even better, as it's a very ball-dominant style of play. Teams that win titles often have a strong collective focus, solid defense, and unselfish ball movement, and Maravich's teams sometimes struggled with those elements. His career sadly ended at 31 due to knee injuries. After his retirement, Maravich turned to spiritual exploration and sought a more peaceful, reflective life. He became deeply religious, and at the time of his death, he was practicing his faith in a way that reflected his desire to make peace with his past. He faced mental health struggles, feeling isolated and misunderstood, dealing with the pressure of being in the spotlight and having a complicated relationship with his father. Pete had a famous quote, "I want to be remembered as a Christian who played basketball, not a basketball player who was a Christian." And remarkably, Pete Maravich predicted his own death. He allegedly said to a reporter, "I don't want to play 10 years and then die of a heart attack when I'm 40. Shockingly, that's exactly what happened. He passed away from heart failure at age 40. It was discovered during his autopsy that he had no left coronary artery, a rare congenital defect. The vessel that supplies blood to the heart muscle was missing, and his right coronary artery had been enlarged to compensate. Without Pete Maravich, this kind of flashy, high-risk, high-reward play might not have become mainstream in basketball culture. We have to really normalize respecting those times then. Remember, things evolve over time, technology gets better, medicine to recover from injuries, but also these moves that have started with the Bob Cousy, revolutionized to Pete Maravich, and then players look back, like a Magic Johnson, like I mentioned, a Larry Bird. They watched Pete Maravich. It really inspired them, which led to the crossover, the flashiness of players you see today, of a Curry, Allen Iverson's crossover back in the day. So if it wasn't for Pete Maravich, if it wasn't for guys like Bob Cousy, we wouldn't have these players today. He normalized the idea that creativity and showmanship can belong in the sport. Pete's ball handling skills, including behind the back and between the leg moves, were unmatched during his era. He laid the foundation for players like Allen Iverson, whose crossover became iconic, and Kyrie Irving, who was widely regarded as one of the best ball handlers in history. Pete even started the trend of pulling up from deep and turning around before it went in, something Stephen Curry popularized. And the fake behind-the-back pass into a layup, which Rajon Rondo made famous. P. Maravich became known as Pistol Pete Maravich. During his era, many players stuck to simple fundamentals, not Pete. He was the first truly unpredictable player to ever play the game.